time and the nature of time is something I've been thinking a great deal about lately, whether that's idleness and the problem of not having enough to do, not filling your time productively, and being susceptible to being led astray by the passions and vices into sin, and the fact that we must all, as Catholics, give account to for every second of every minute of every day of our life before Christ, who will judge us at the end of time and also at the end of our life. But also the fact that so often we can distract ourselves and miss the big picture by filling our time with so many different things that serve to scatter our attention and our focus, and so that we're utterly divided and we're not moving towards the goal, which is sainthood, to be with Christ for all eternity in heaven. And so it's finding that balance between finding rest, observing the Sabbath, and forcing yourself to rest and contemplate the nature of time and eternity and salvation, but also using what time you do have, what little time, for the best, for the glory of God, so that He would be glorified through our lives. And it's a difficult thing because on the one hand, some people by nature love to plan, and I think I'm one of those people. Love to have a schedule, love to have events and trips and fixtures booked well into the future so that I know what I'm doing. Because as creatures we crave certainty, we crave security, we crave the peace that comes from knowing everything is going to be okay. But at the same time, that can so often minimize and negate and push out the leading of the Holy Spirit, who might prompt us in the moment to change our plans, or to change course, or to do something that we might not expect or had not planned for or factored into our life. So it's that balance between those two poles. On the one hand, of being spontaneous, which can sometimes lead to being slothful, idle. On the other hand, being so meticulous and so rigid with your plans and determining what your will is, that you miss or take a different road that altogether circumvents the will of God. And so it's that balance, and that's, I suppose, what we're all looking for. And that's why routine is so important. But then routine alone isn't enough, because life can just pass you by if you do the same repetitions. You follow the cycle of the seasons, the calendar, the rising and the setting of the sun, moving in an arc through the sky. And all of a sudden, after so many of those cycles have passed, it's the end of your life, and you find yourself being lowered into the ground. And you don't have that option to make physical choices and physical actions anymore, because you revert to spirit. So it's a privilege to be able to given this time, but at the same time, there are points in our lives when we can feel trapped. Certainly as children, when we lack the power of speech to articulate how we feel, and then growing older, we lack the resources and the means and the legal standing to be able to make decisions that affect ourselves. We're solely bound to the wills of our parents and guardians and those around us who have charge over us. But once you hit adulthood, then it all becomes real, and you do have the choices. But then you're constrained by things like finances, laws even. And so this freedom can often lead to inertia, where we're just completely paralyzed by the amount of choices we have. And we're pulled in so many different directions that we just end up stationary and static, not knowing what to do. Fear of making the wrong choice, leading to indecision, and ultimately leading to regret at the end, when we realize that the time we had was squandered. So it's difficult taking the time to think intentionally about what am I doing with my time, and at the same time not so desiring to live your life at such a rate of speed that it passes you by without you having asked that question, filling it with all manner of achievements. And that this is something that's affected me since I started running properly as an adult. And then 2 years ago I ran my first marathon in quite a poor time, and then I ran another one in slightly better time, and then I ran several more, each time improving the time, each time with better shoes, better clothing, better nutrition, better strategy. And it becomes an obsession, shaving time off your marathon, always seeking for that goal pace, that goal time. And then once you've done several marathons, you then move on to ultra marathons, and you start off by doing an easy one with a little bit of climb, and then all of a sudden they become harder, and you take on more miles, you take on higher ascents, and it becomes more extreme. It becomes more of a separation from the masses, and you feel it's something that gives you take immense pride in, because you see that you're achieving what so many people can't do. So many people who are limited by their physical conditions, maybe it's ill health, maybe they've just simply not got the ability or aptitude or the mental fortitude to be able to undertake a really, really long run. And so it does make you feel very proud to do that. But at the same time, it's once the feeling is passed, once you've crossed the finish line, you do, certainly in my case, I experienced a huge climax, because you've been training and thinking, preparing for a long time, wondering how the race was going to go. And then when you cross the line after 5 or 8 hours or so, you break down in tears, because it's such a strong emotion comes over you, not least because you think so few people have experienced this, and it really does set you apart. But then the next day, or even later that evening, once the dust has settled and you've got your medal and your t-shirt, it really doesn't mean very much at all, and you begin almost immediately planning your next event, your next race, researching the qualifying times, thinking about what you need, whether you're good enough to do something more extreme. And it can so easily become an end in itself, and a religion in a sense, where you're always trying to push your body to the extreme. And this is seen in so many different sports and so many different physical pursuits, hobbies, even things like weightlifting, fitness, but even in sports like golf, where you're constantly pushing yourself to lower your handicap. And so these things, while they can keep us busy and they can honor God in the sense that we're using the gifts he gave us, and we can do it for his glory to a degree, but at the same time, if we completely obsess over it to the point where it becomes idolatry, then we risk missing the whole point of life itself. And so all these goods, these temporal goods God gave us in this life, as a gift to steward, to return to him, at his discretion, and to be at his disposal. And so when I think about the nature of time, and I think about my own occupation with as a school teacher, and the fact that that takes up so much time, I'm often challenged, am I really in this role for the good of the children who are in my care, who I'm endeavouring to teach and to show the faith and to catechize to some degree. Certainly when you're in a Christian school, that's part of the aim, is to be a witness to the faith that you teach. But at the same time, if it is just a job, and it can't occupy any more time than that. And so that's another thing that I think about is at what point do you identify with a job or with a hobby or with something you do? And that's, I suppose, where the wonder of vocations like holy orders come into their own, because you are quite literally living to pray, living to study in community, and to express the perfect love of the Trinity in the most profound and acute sense. And so being intentional with our time is so incredibly important, but at the same time, spending too much time dwelling on what we are to do, we risk never actually reaching our vocation. And our first vocation, of course, is to become a saint. So I often think to myself, these good things that God has given us. For me, when I think about hobbies, I think about distance running and boxing. And you'll see on this channel that I've been posting clips of sparring, and that's part of the reason of that is because it's good to look back on and to see improvements, but also it's just interesting, I suppose, watching something like that happen, because you can never plan or choreograph or predict what will happen. It's very present in the sense of when you're sparring, and I'd like to talk about this on another video at some point, you're completely fixated on the moment. And I've heard fighters talk about this, where they say all the problems in life that you face, all the struggles, the daily life, the workplace, the family, debt, legal challenges, all these problems when you're in the boxing ring melt into nothing, because all there is you and an opponent who's trying to take your head off. And all you can do is react to it and try your best to fight back. And so that's, I suppose, one of the things I love most about boxing, sparring, is that being completely present. It is completely immersive in the sense that you've got nothing else to think about. You can't think about it, you just have to do it. And occasionally when I'm really struggling, or I know that I'm against a much better opponent, I will have the presence of mind to say a Hail Mary, to ask Our Lady's intercession. And I do believe that boxing has given me so much, because it's given me discipline, it's given me structure, it's given me routine, but most importantly, it's shown me the holistic nature of life, that every single decision we make is intertwined. There's no isolated decisions. There's nothing that will not have a knock-on effect on something else. Everything is interlinked. If you have a bad diet, you'll feel it when you're trying to fight. If you don't exercise and keep fit, you'll feel it because you simply won't have the strength or the power to fight. If you are in a bad space spiritually or mentally, you will feel it because you won't have the confidence to do it, and you won't have the motivation to fight, and you won't have the fortitude and the strength and the resilience to train and to fight. And so all these things coalesce into this perfect unity with boxing, so that when you're in the ring feeling fluent, it's because of all those decisions that you've made in every area of your life that have contributed towards it. Whereas other things, such as listening to someone speak or watching a video of something, all these things are one-dimensional in the sense of there's no real exchange going on. You can never really know, is that the truth of that matter, because you're seeing one element to it. But with boxing, it all coalesces and comes together. And that's what I love most, I think. So how we spend our time is so incredibly important, and not wanting to risk boxing and running turning into idols, which they can so easily become. It's so important to moderate them, but at the same time to recognize that they're from God as a gift, and if we are able to do them, it's by the grace of God, and that we should always be willing to lay them aside for the glory of God if He so requires it of us. And it shouldn't be a heaviness or a hindrance to us doing that. So, returning to the nature of time, I think that's why routines are so important, because routines are very much the structure and the determining factor of where we end up, those small incremental decisions. So things like daily Bible readings, doing the 1 year Bible, doing the Divine Office morning and evening, and saying the rosary from the heart each day, and then in Mass as frequently as possible saying the Apostles' Creed, saying the Kyrie eleison, saying the Gloria, and meaning it with your heart, and then receiving the Eucharist with your lips and making that silent prayer in your heart to the Holy Spirit. All these things come together to ensure that time is not wasted. And then, of course, if you only do these things, you remain an island, you remain isolated, and you miss out on the very crux of the gospel, which is communal. It's for the salvation of the whole world, not just us. And so then you've got to think about, am I fulfilling the Great Commission by making disciples, by sharing, by evangelizing, by being a good witness? And that's the main reason that I've started this YouTube channel, because I want to share my faith. And it's difficult because I don't even know where to start or what people will think, and then you risk the judgment of people misunderstanding your intentions of why you want to do it. And then you second guess yourself and think, why am I doing this? Why am I making videos about my faith? What's so special about my faith? Why would anyone be interested? But then you trust in God that He has a plan, and that desire He gives you to do it. If you're honest with yourself, we are divided creatures. The heart is deceitful above all things, and everything is done with mixed motives. But ultimately you trust that God will bring good through it. And so evangelism and sharing the good news, the gospel of Christ, is so important, and that's something else that as Catholics we're called to spend our time, to expend our efforts and toil upon. There's a verse that resonated with me very recently from the book of Daniel, which says that the righteous will shine like stars, but also that those who lead many to righteousness, i.e. evangelists and ministers and bringers and bearers of the good news, will stand out in the heavens for doing that because of the eternal value placed upon it. And so evangelism is so important. And then of course you come to the corporal acts of mercy, the physical acts of caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting those who are imprisoned. And in this atomized age where everyone is expected to fend for themselves and risking interaction with someone else is such a difficult thing for so many people, practicing those acts of mercy are so important. And this is an area that in my own life massively I know that I need and I want to improve upon and do these things, because unless we intentionally decide to do them, life passes us by and the time escapes us. And so we can spend a whole afternoon or a whole evening or a whole weekend completely immersed in ourselves, in our hobbies, in our mode of life, without having a second thought for the suffering and the immense suffering that surrounds us. And so getting involved and practicing the works of mercy are so incredibly important, and I'm speaking to myself here more than anyone in the whole world. And I hope that part of this channel can be a journey where I am forcing myself through the grace of God to get involved and to begin to practice these acts of mercy with a pure heart, with the right intentions, and doing it in the knowledge that as I'm ministering to my fellow humans, I'm ministering to Christ, who gives us this time for a reason and is ultimately the judge to whom we're accountable for the time that we are given. And there's no greater model in this than Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, who gave her fiat, her yes, and knowing the sorrows that were in store for her, and knowing everything that was being given to her in terms of the gravity of suffering and the sorrow that her life would witness, she knew with a deep-seated knowledge that it was the right thing to do, and she did it because she wanted to, out of love for God. And so, above all, when it comes to spending our time and choosing what to do each day, what to live for, my prayer through this channel is that I can be more accountable for the time that I spend. And I hope that those of you watching as well will find some, I suppose, insight into at least someone else's journey, and that might be a good source of comparison to your own. God bless you.